Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Practice Makes Perfect discussion series. My name is Michael Vodino, and I'm your host. And I'm hosting this podcast in partnership with CSIOP, the Canadian Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychologists. And I'm excited to have you join us for this live airing on LinkedIn of our discussion today. So, what we're going to be talking about today is a topic that has been the focus of organizational psychologists for many, many years, and is in the midst of some significant changes driven by advancements in technology and the way we collect and utilize data. And that is the topic of personnel selection, which I think of as our ability to reliably and efficiently match roles to talent in a way that maximizes productivity, outcomes, and ideally the job satisfaction and fulfillment that people get from being well matched into job experiences that suit their capabilities and their motivations. And so big data and machine learning are already impacting the selection experience in many ways. And it's likely that we're near a point where our ability to select people into roles is going to be done way better than it's ever been done before in a way that requires less human involvement than we've ever had. And to help us understand that shift, what is happening, why it's happening, what forces are at play, and what that all means for us as professionals, as people who might be on the job market. I'm excited to have Piers Steel, who is a professor at the University of Calgary and who has written and thought extensively on this topic. And Piers, I'm going to pass it to you to introduce yourself a little bit
Yeah,
further.
yeah. I just put it into ChatGPT and asked it to generate a few lines, right? It was very nice, though, I must say. Dr. Piers Steel is a prominent figure in the field of IO psychology, renowned for his groundbreaking research on procrastination, motivation, and self-regulation. Thank you. His work, particularly the development of temporal motivation theory, has significantly advanced the understanding of human behavior in organizational settings. Dr. Steele's insights are integral to improving workplace efficiency and employee productivity, making him a key contributor to IO psychology. Wow, thank you so much.
You got like you got the nice version of
Yeah,
ChatGPT.
it's actually ChatGPT trained itself on about 100,000 books. So it's in the core of its programming. My book was one of them. So it has this, it can do this,
Okay.
right? Yeah. On the other hand, that is a transfer of intellectual property without payment. But on the other hand, it can generate bios for me quickly.
Okay. Well, none of us signed up for that, but I guess this is where we're at.
Yeah, that's right. I might as well make use of it.
Mm-hmm.
So the future, right? Where are we now? I've been doing this.
Maybe start tell us a bit, Piers, how you got really interested in this topic and how you started to go down the path of thinking deeply about it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, when I did my master's, I did master's at the University of Guelph, and then I was being taught this kind of way of doing selection. I thought it was just so incredibly inefficient. I mean, basically, it's like a doctor having to validate his or her medicines every time. So if they want to treat something for their kind of group of patients, they have to do kind of another kind of validation study showing that this medicine works on these patients and has to be replicated in every single practice. And that's kind of like how we do selection. It is, and what type of medicine would we have then? We're going to have like some type of low-level painkiller, this and that, a few things. It would be, we wouldn't have what we have now. But that's the way we were doing selection, local validation, proving it again and again and again, every single place. Tedious. And And what we're teaching is really just methodology, not outcomes, right? This is how you do it again and again and again. So it's not really kind of scientifically based. And then, of course, we got a little bit with Frank Schmidt, who, with taking away sampling error, and now you have some type of generalizability with meta-analysis. Now, of course, there's I got a paper coming up now in Journal of Applied Psychology, saying he overestimated it by a little bit, the actual relationship between general mental ability and performance. By a little bit, I mean 14-fold. So Paul Sackett, we were having a discussion about this last year, and we both had almost the same paper. His is out. Mine will be coming out soon, but mine's the better one, right? So, but it's generally kind of consensus along these things. Okay, so now we know there's regularities among jobs. So now we can play this game quite easily together. All right, let's say I have a job and it requires moving heavy boxes onto higher shelves, right? What characteristic do you think that needs?
I think it needs flexibility, strength, hand-eye coordination.
Yeah, well, fine, that's great. Notice you did that without actually doing any type of local validation, right? So we can know that there's a relationship between the task and the individual characteristics necessarily to do it. If I told you, for example, the job required a lot of problem solving, right, and it was quite complex, and it had you might come back and say, well, that would probably require more general mental ability. And you'd be right. So we can actually now put this together and say, okay, the association between certain individual characteristics, like your strength, your general mental ability, they're predictably higher in some jobs and lower than others. So we don't really need to do a local validation study. We can just simply look at the job, and I wrote a paper from the worker, one knows the work, and you can start predicting exactly what that correlation is going to be. Now, you only need to really do one column of that matrix, because the rest are just the correlations among individual difference variables, which are by definition stable, or they wouldn't be traits, right? So you get some fluctuation, mostly by what measure you use. But if you use a kind of keep the measures the same, they're almost always, they don't fluctuate very much at all. So you're just saying in some jobs, let's say you were to say a job requires, let's say, a lot of customer service. You probably more agreeableness, a little more extroversion, would have a higher association with performance. All right, well, what have we done there? I threw a lot of math around that simple idea and showing it could be done, and I did proof of concepts. But basically, we can create personnel selection equations just on the basis of job characteristics. Once you describe the work, I've got a very good idea about who should be in it. Now, it's not perfect. There's error around that. In fact, if you can make a job, let's say, with over 500 people in your local validation study, go with that one. It'll be slightly better. Less than 500 people, do it this way, right? And that's just the way, that's when equivalency happens. So it's actually really good. Okay, so now we can do this across all sorts of jobs. We can do it across every occupation. Right. So now we have a good idea of what type of person using general human capital, would actually go into that particular job. Right. We know the relationship, for example, between the personality traits, general mental ability, interests, and what would actually work well for this job. But what we're lacking at this point is, what is your actual traits? We need to actually do that and assess it. Or do we? Big data. Big data actually at this point I think it was back in about Cambridge Analytica. They was in about 2015, and they started getting in on this. They had a data set they used from Facebook, and they could show, for example, they could predict people's actual traits from their social media. It was a proof of concept. Since then, that is like 10 generations back. In fact, there's been enough research on it that there was a meta-analysis on all these. And that meta-analysis right now is 5 years old, right? It's they know pretty much everything about us. It's called surveillance capitalism. And so you can make proxies of apparently better, not just proxies, better measures than your own self-report. So these ones are more valid than your own self-report, which will be kind of influenced by how you're feeling that day, whether you got a good night's sleep or not, all the rest of it. So these ones are actually better. And so now we have one side, the equation. On the other side, we have the individual differences. You put them together, and we can start doing selection on a global scale with billions and billions and billions of people, everybody, right? And so that.
Well, so let me ask you. So you're sort of setting up the part one is, like you said, just to sum it up. If we know the needs of the job, we can infer the requirements of the individual. And
right.
Based on the amount of data that we now have access to, we can infer the individual's capabilities and complete the picture in order to make that connection, make that match, even on a very local level, even on an individual level. Now, where in your opinion, let's say, like, where are we at today with all that? Is this
I mean,
almost like theoretically, like, we're capable of this conceptually, but like, where are we at in actually implementing something like this?
Well, this has been a 70-year-old journey. I mean, the people started thinking about this back in the 1950s, and it's been tried and hasn't really, a lot of false starts. The math really wasn't developed back then. What you really needed was a good meta-analytic moderator searches. So that basically allows you to predict correlations. When's the correlation goes up and what's down, which we then just put in a matrix and it runs, right? So then that's a sign of mature science, right? It's where science is going, where we actually know what the association is going to be in certain circumstances, right? And it's at this point, it's kind of really established. It's nothing controversial about it whatsoever. So I kind of wrote back in 2006, from the work one knows the work, or the theoretical element that we could do this. And then I think in about, crickets, though, by the way, based on that paper, I thought, wow, I thought it was kind of cool. It was a 60-year-old riddle, and we solved it. And then we kind of like so then we did a one which actually with data sets showing, okay, because it's not just theoretical, here's a data set actually showing it works. For that one, you used the position assessment questionnaire, the PAQ, and it worked actually really, really well. And it could predict the validity coefficients, the correlations between these individual traits and performance. So then we showed, look, it's working. And then it was like nothing, right? So then we went and we did a special issue for SciOps, science and practice. And then we got a compendium of practitioners, selection experts, everyone. And they went through and they vetted it, and the consensus was we could do it. It was done. And we had like former greats, like he passed away recently, but Robert Guyon, who is, wrote the handbook on this, thought it was impossible. He was an advocate, then he thought it was impossible, and then he came back to being an advocate again. So it was last thing saying we can do it, right? It's great. So then it was trying to get the industry to adopt it. And we thought, well, once we have the proof of concept, the subjective norms, it was going to be a go. Wow, I was way too optimistic because this was back about now 14 years ago. So we tried to get him moving forward. We even, tried to get even some patents for it, which is kind of a strange experience. Saying this is the patent officer. This is an obvious recombination of previous techniques, right? And we said, well, here are a dozen people saying it's impossible. So is that really obvious? Yes, it is. And it's kind of like, who is this person, right? I understand that some of the larger ones, some companies are using it. People in the industry tell me, yeah, they really appreciate your presentation, but they're just going to reverse engineer it and not going to go. And that's, by the way, a really common story. That's the way it typically goes. Once you can't get a patent to protect it, it's over, really. But it's getting absorbed. So it is already starting to go forward. So it's happening now, but just not on an international scale. But it could be on an international scale. And if you want to have an example of that one, we're talking about this season 2 of Westworld has a company which does this called Insight. And it predicts people's future. It has all the data on them, and is able to determine whether they should be employable or not, which is where we are right now. So the technology is already here. It's been here for a while. And we have the capability to implement it. And right now, me and Colin Lee, we've been doing these massive simulations of the entire U.S. labor market to estimate what would happen to GDP if you could make better use of human capital. So that means like very talented people, like for example, Robert Lanigan. I think he had one of the highest IQs ever recorded. He's my go-to example because he spent a long time as a bouncer in Long Island. Now, I don't know about high IQ people. I imagine he was a great bouncer for that bar, but he could have done a lot more. So that was unused or kind of exploited human capital. And we have that all over the place for various reasons. Trying to getting people who have talent in the place where they make the biggest impact. We don't really have a good system for that yet. So we have a lot of slop, a lot of unused human capital. And there's all these articles saying, what's your most important asset? People, what's the lifeblood of a nation? It's people, right? So making the best use of them. Colin Lee and I, we did this giant simulation. It's about a 20% pop in GDP. So it's like in the United States, like $4 trillion annually.
So what I'm curious about is how we get there. Like, so how we get from where we're at today to what that 20% pop promises. And maybe if you can take me through, so a selection process, let's say, right? Like, so we have a role, it opens up, we post it, we recruit for it, people raise their hands and say, I'm interested, right? We go through a process of interviewing them multiple times, of
that's automated.
Essentially almost we don't assume anything about them.
That's most of that will that's it's not
right. So talk to me about the pieces that are going to change here, because we take our pool of candidates, we assume very little about them. We have bits of data, which are their resume, their cover letter. We gather information through interviews, through conversations, essentially. We narrow down our list. We make our decision. We're losing good people all along the way. We're making bad choices. There's bias as part of the process. It's inefficient. And then we sort of play it out from there. What are the pieces? What does the future look like in contrast to that?
Very good. I mean, what happens when it scales? So we have the capacity to scale it right now. We've had it for a while. But it's going to get consolidated. People aren't going to do a large section of they're not going to have in-house selection systems. You're going to have what is called a labor market intermediary. And it comes from a thing called two-sided economics. So it's a matchmaker, basically, right? You have a group of candidates on one side, a group of organizations on the other, and you try and kind of there's one thing in the middle. And you get these all the time. They exist already. You know, they go by them. Some of the names are talent agencies. So a talent agency tries to connect people to job opportunities. And we already have some kind of platforms along these lines as well. You know, like things like Fiverr, right? Small ones. But here we can actually do it and scale like it. So people would come in and they would be partially assessed in terms of their big data. They would release it and they would be vetted. And maybe if there was an area of doubt, there could be they could be assessed more rigorously. But then they would have that on one side. Organizations would come in and say, okay, we're looking for these types of people. Now it's just for general human capital. There's also going to be firm-specific human capital, which might include accreditation, like knowing how to program, let's say, in Python. And that's not general; it's a very specific skill. So there can be kind of an add-on after that. So where they're kind of looking for particular individuals beyond that. But once you have this kind of fundamentals down, the labor market intermediary usually takes a little piece of the action for taking away the friction. So you can do that from either side, or you can even do it for free and do it for kind of add-ons. Like, for example, they might say, well, we'll go and negotiate salary for you. And we'll go, and for that, we'll take 1%, or here's the average salary for each one. We'll take 5% of the increase in that. It can add up really quickly. It can be incredibly lucrative along those lines. But the nice thing about that is that it does return some negotiating power back to labor. Right now we have this huge kind of lopsided between capital and labor, financial capital, and they're just labor is losing power all the time. And typically we rebalance that with unions, which have just been kind of crushed. So this is one way of actually taking the place of unions. So somebody kind of representing you and your interests. They might even have like a position where they take a piece of your salary in perpetuity. So they actually have motivation to see you rise in the ranks. Yeah. And when that happens, they might, for example, subsidize things like training, your education. They might, for example, say, if you wanted to get this advanced degree, we know it's in demand. Here's a great place to actually get the education we have. We've bought in bulk, so we can reduce the costs. And we also will subsidize relocation fees to different parts of to kind of make sure you need to go where you go. So it has, as you can see, once we have a place that can do all of that, a lot of productivity is unleashed.
Yeah. So I think about, first of all, it's interesting that your perception is that this adds negotiating power to labor. I could see, like who's really the client here. I could see it going different ways, but I can also see, okay, so we have
multiple labor market intermediaries, because if you think of one is not representing you well, you should be able to go to the next one, right? There needs to be that level of competition. Of course, if I was running one of these and being completely immoral, I'd try and do things to keep people in there and make it very difficult for them to move. So everything needs to be some level of regulation, right, to keep the market efficient.
Right, right. So the efficiency is happening way out here, in the sense that an organization. So a talent acquisition department in HR in an organization becomes essentially, outsourced
Yeah.
to this intermediary. When you need help, you want to hire for a role, you know where to go, right? These are the people who, and then essentially that they could, hypothetically say, okay, from our talent pool, here's your top three people. Here's, maybe even here's your person, let's say. And so you have that efficient, and you can, let's say, you can rely upon their knowledge to say, statistically, our recommendation is, you could go through your whole process if you want to. Our recommendation is going to beat that out 9 times out of
That's
10
right.
based on what
And
we know.
you they can be realistic about it. I mean, all these things are probabilistic.
Sure.
The You can say this candidate has, and we actually did this for for when I was kind of trying to set up a company, Right Hire. I think they're trying to give it another shot for it, but it's very difficult to compete with customers when your argument is my math is better than their math. It just doesn't sell the way you think. But uh, the there you can also even go beyond that, because this can really get into not just person job fit, right, or person organization fit, but the other way around. So you're not just, it's two-way. So if you're going up for a job, and we can go in and say, look, we have this series of companies we think that would be great for you. This is the better fit for you. And we can predict not just performance on one side, we can predict your job satisfaction on the other. Because there's a good match between your values and this company's values. And that's going to be worth a little something, right? Maybe you're in a position to say, no, I really need the money. I don't care if I'm miserable. We got to make these mortgage payments. Just get me the highest cost one. Say, fine, great. This is the one for you, right? This is going to be paying more. But the ones that pay more usually are going to be the ones with the worst culture, because you'd have to pay more. I mean, if two of them are the same, and once this is a better fit in terms of culture, which one are you going to go? You're going to go if they both stay the same, you're going to go with that one. So you're going to get everyone else. It's going to be a competitive advantage. So organizations are now going to have to compete more formally to attract high quality individuals based on internal culture, and supervision and organizational justice and all those other good things that we like, to some extent, or they have to pay extra to ignore those.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, I mean, companies are already competing on those sort of employee value propositions of pay and culture and flexibility and whatever else they're competing on. But to your point, it's working the other way too, right? Because if the market can accurately assess for those things and prioritize to a candidate based on those metrics, then you are, like you said, sort of more formally competing on them. Which I guess, again, the promise of big data and predictive ability cuts both
Yeah,
ways in that sense.
it doesn't go all against us, right? There is some advantages to it, but there is one of the things that's going to happen. This is one thing that worries me. We're talking about meritocracy, right? This is ultimately, it's somewhat unbiased meritocracy in the essence that we're only going to be doing on individual differences that are shown to improve performance, right? And fit and retention. And maybe the other way is job satisfaction too. But what happens to people who don't meet that? What happens to people who now, and this is what's the thing with Westworld, some people were deemed that they were not hireable.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of these things becomes scalable, that not just it becomes a prediction. If these are scaled and this is what it is, it becomes reality. You will not be hired for any position of note. And by the way, we'll tell you, we know that for the most part at a fairly young age. That causes a little bit of tension in a kind of society where you have these now institutionalized have-nots. And when you have that actually happen, when people feel they don't have a shot at a system, they don't really care about whether it's meritocratic, right?
Hmm.
Meritocratic. They care about having a good life, and they won't buy into it. You get a lot of these ones called like elite overproduction theory, right? And they have a lot of books along these lines. In fact, our present political tension can be attributed partly to this, is that we have more and more wealth going in fewer and fewer hands. This is going to be part of that too. So some people are going to do very well. We're going to get a great boost in productivity, but it's also going to make that line between the haves and have-nots that much sharper. So it doesn't solve that issue. It just makes it worse. Right?
Yeah, it makes it more defined.
Yeah,
Like there are people, just because of the lack of equality between the requirements of our labor market and the labor that's there to provide it. You will always have winners and losers. You'll always have people that are on the outs. But when you don't have a system that tells you that you're not going to get hired,
yeah,
you
that's
have
right.
you have the hope and motivation of still engaging in that process. You take that away, and it just becomes starker, or more problematic in some ways, I think.
And the other one is, how are we doing this right now? We're doing this over video. And you were talking about how you were last couple of years, you were remote coming in, and I was
Yep.
doing it as well. Actually, I even did a month of it while in Mexico. It was fine, right? And great weather. I did all my meetings on Zoom. So why would I need somebody local? Once we can get global hiring and we can assess the world globally, what are the odds the person you should be hiring is going to be in the same city as you? Why not I just go, if I want to have a competitive advantage, why don't I go in some place where the cost of living and consequently how much I have to pay is much, much lower?
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to, it's kind of the other effect of globalization, right? And it enables the virtual outsourcing of jobs that much easier, right? And also because if you go through these labor market intermediaries who can then vouch for the worth of your potential employee, that's great too. Which then brings up to point, well, would I need to hire somebody full-time even then? If it's so easy to hire people, right? If this technology comes in, wouldn't, like hiring somebody's like buying in bulk, So I'm buying all this time, all these kind of responsibilities. How about if I just do just-in-time hiring? And like you actually see these in some places like video game development. They hire for the product, and as soon as it's ready, mass layoffs. And then they hire back when they need them. That type of strategy gets also put up when you take away the problem of selection. This is done in economics. I think it's called the market for lemons, and it's the problem of hiring someone typically is because you don't know me that well, I don't know you that well. We're trying to kind of assess the quality of the individual, and both sides are trying to do the same, but there's a lot of what's called informational asymmetry. It means I know me better than you know me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this makes it kind of difficult once you have somebody who's kind of good enough. It's like, well, should I risk it and get somebody better? But let's say we take almost all that risk out of the system, and then I can go globally, right? What you're going to get is, well, yeah, you're good, but this one's marginally better. We're gonna hire this person, and this person is not better than you, but cheaper. And these are the types of things, what happens when you have good selection. Because what essentially you're doing is commodifying the labor force.
Hmm.
You're turning us into a commodity. Once I have a very, very good idea of what everybody can do in terms of performance, and I can scale it up, it becomes, and I can make it somewhat frictionless. Yeah, the society gets a big pop in productivity. That goes up, way up, right? But there's a lot of undesirable, you know, side effects as well.
Yeah, I'd love to get into some of those too, because we've touched on them. It's sort of like talking about the potential benefits of what this reality looks like. And
A lot of there's a lot. I mean, ideally, what would happen is, we take this productivity and we put it back into, let's say, you know, better housing, 4-day work weeks. Hey, more productivity. How about we make it so not everyone has to work as hard, and we just break it down? That'd be great. Or better healthcare, or better education, or but that's not what we do. Very
yeah,
rarely.
realistically,
It gets the amount of concentration to upper hands is where it has been going. And you can take it. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, you've seen the charts about productivity rise versus wage rise since the 1970s. And yeah, there's a small increase for wages, which about a tenth of the productivity went into that. And where did the money go? I mean, I think the top 0.1% tripled, or I know got a 50% increase. Yeah, it's a 50% increase in their wealth in the last 3 years. Right, it's just going more and more and less and less. That is something this technology definitely can enable. Right, so it potentially could be great for society, but I see that it will be great for some portion of society. And
yeah,
after that, doesn't become a selection problem. No, we solved it. We did a great job at it. One of our shining kind of contributions as psychologists is really getting selection down, and we're about to kind of really take that all the way home. And we've had, what type of group can say they've had multi-trillion-dollar impacts on the productivity of a nation? And we're going to be able to say we did that. But then it becomes political after that. The disenfranchisement. We're also enabling a disenfranchisement of a sizable portion of the population.
hmm
We're enabling globalization. We're enabling commodification. These are really disruptive to society. I mean, it's scary. It can get really scary. And now couple that with, let's say, advances in AI. I do a lot of workshops on that too, and I'm doing stuff right now I only thought I could do. I it's extended my capability by quite a bit. Working with AI very, very closely. I only do stuff which I know I can vet, but it makes it, some things that used to take 3 hours takes 20 minutes now. And, I'm producing a lot more, but, that means that for a lot of professions, especially in the research intensive ones, we need about half of us, right? What do we need? What are we going to do with the other half? What are we going to do with the HR departments we shut down, right? And then and I'm looking at, actually, that's just the part that's going through screens. The development in robotic AI now being linked by these AI, these large language models, they're impressive. I mean, some of them have increased their learning capacity by 50-fold in the last year, right? Their ability to do stuff.
Sounds to me like we've solved, so like we will have solved selection just in time for humans to become obsolete anyway.
Well, a little bit. It's still going to be. We're not there yet, and I kind of thought about that kind of too. But it's still kind of wonderful technology. We can, for example, um, predict in not. It doesn't have to be just for selection. You know, we're actually doing a presentation this summer at Academy of Management, showing the same type of technology. If you kind of move it around a little bit, it can make something called an inference machine. So it can predict not just, for example, performance. We can predict, let's say, life satisfaction, and we can give you personalized advice about what you can do based upon the sum of science for that. So these kind of the way we kind of typically do it is again through these podcasts, right? Somebody might write a book about it and then go to a podcast too, and people read it. But this is going to be an interactive AI that based upon the sum of science can give you personalized advice. So it really is your own personal assistant.
Yeah.
So that we have that going for us. We can do a lot with this. So there's nothing wrong with us getting to the point where, you know, we went from a 6-day work week to a 5-day work week, I think back in the 1920s or 30s. And everyone was saying, well, it'd be such a terrible for industry. It wasn't. You know, we can, if political will has it, we can go down to a 4-day work week. We don't have to kind of cut jobs as so much as scope of jobs. So this becomes ultimately a political issue. It only becomes a problem if we continue doing what we've always been doing. But that's a problem because we're like that.
Because we've done what we've done for
Yeah,
pretty
right.
embedded reasons.
That's right, exactly. Power
Yeah.
perpetuates power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
What
I
else
think
do
the
you think we're
theme,
gonna
you know, the theme to this conversation and others around AI that I've had are the technology has moved very quickly and will continue to move quickly, and that seems less the barrier to this future than the human side of all of it. And frankly, well,
do?
the
Okay,
technological
I think I
promise.
got the analogy. You're right. I mean, the work where people are actually doing work, right? You can think of it like an ever shrinking life raft. And we're getting much better at deciding who gets to go on that life raft. But the life raft is shrinking.
Mhm.
So it's we've solved some problems, but ultimately the other ones are simply societal and structural.
Right, and I think the underlying fear is that they become more acute as technology makes the life raft smaller and wealth inequality gets bigger, and you know, the things that gave us purpose that we traditionally connected to start to go away. Yeah, there's it's hard not to like feel the tension underneath all of that.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about this. I think, I mean, there is something to be said for a responsible research and innovation lens. It's basically that we as researchers, you know, if we're inventing in something like the atomic bomb or napalm or something like that, we do have a responsibility to at least say, this is some of the implications of what we're doing. This is some of the ethical elements. This is what it could enable. I've now gone through like 10 journals trying to kind of say we should actually talk about this, right? So it's right now at International Journal of Selection Assessment as a provocation, you know, hopefully. But in some ways, I get this as unusual. We don't usually talk about these things. We're just we focus ourselves as technicians, the technical part about how to doing this, rather than thinking. Nobody actually slowing down, and this is something we critique everyone else of. No one ever actually questions whether we should. We never ever even think about whether we should, or what does it mean if it happens. And that's I kind of like this, that we have a chance to have this conversation, because we should talk about this. This is what we're doing right now. I'll give you the title of that article. It's the end game of personal selection. So what happens when we've done it, and we're very close to doing it? And basically, costless, frictionless, effective, unbiased, and potentially very, very dangerous. Right. Now we do have to take that break.
Okay.
For what we want as well as what they want. So kind of where it works out, but ultimately, it helps to price people better. The commodification of the workforce. So if you're really, really good, you tend not to get the, your actual fair market value, because they can't price you that well, and it's difficult for other places to price you that well. So you kind of you get like 30% more, even if you're 10 times as good, right?
Right. Can I ask you a related question? I hope it's not off topic, but I was thinking about other areas where we have sort of done this algorithmic matching of people based on qualities in the online dating world. And I'm curious if you've seen anything from there that, I don't know, is a cautionary note or instructive when you think about, some of these things with respect to like personnel selection.
Yeah, and it is. We actually have like one coming out, and Science and Practice, about this.
Oh,
And
nice.
it's the but it's look, you can be perfect for the job, and your supervisor does not like you, right? There's variances associated with supervisor, and the fit. So you can have person organization fit, but you can also have supervisor person fit, and we tend to treat that as error. We tend to treat that as, that's we'll just correct for that. We reliably corrections, and we see we're predicting all the relevant variants. Yeah, but for me, that getting along with my supervisor, who's actually going to give me promotions and make my kind of life more, bearable at work, that's not error. That's really, really, really important. And the same thing for the supervisor, right? They want to actually kind of get along with their employees. So this one is kind of more at the generic level or occupational level. It doesn't take into account the fit between the person and the individual, between the supervisor and the individual. So yeah, it's not going to be a perfect match, but we can move towards that. It's still possible, because really, we do matching all the time. We match you to your content of what you're going to be watching. We match you with advertisements. It's just changing the criterion. So it is, the technique and the technology is all there. But and people can go in, and they kind of have this. A lot of people still like to have this romantic view that I'm going to have this idea that I'm going to be able to tell whether this person is right through an interview, and it's just like, no, you can't. You're predicting error. You're predicting beyond your capability, right? And sometimes they're going to be right, and sometimes they're going to be wrong. And there's been all these things about clinical matching, and whether it's above algorithmic, and pretty much universally, it's not, doesn't add anything.
What do you mean by clinical matching?
Oh yeah, well, there is about whether you have a clinician, an expert, and they go and do this, kind of in-depth interviewing. Did they do better at predicting,
Hmm.
say, performance or a whole bunch of others? There's been meta-analyses on it, and pretty much no. There's you sometimes there's some individuals who occasionally are better, but they're completely swamped by the people who think they are. So it's not really an effective way of doing it. Yeah, you can pointing at the limitations of algorithmic matching isn't the same as saying that these kind of more, I would say, gut feel is
Like
better.
organic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
organic. Yeah, typically no.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But
I
yeah.
no, I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask on a couple of things. One is we talked about it earlier, but you sort of made the point with Cambridge Analytica and big data on the technology is there to assess somebody's job relevant qualities well enough to make these kinds of matching predictions. I'm curious, like, what is that like? As somebody who I worked as a research scientist developing assessments, that seems like a high bar. What does that look like from a data? What data would get us there if we were
Well, yeah.
assessing somebody?
There's problems with it too, right? I mean, fixable problems. So it has to be done in an in-depth way, and you can't really predict 100% of the variance. Like, let's say I go and I think this person is great for the job, and they have everything going, and they come to the job, and 3 days into the job, their spouse dies, and they go through a terrible depression, right, in a random accident, and it's they can barely get themselves out of bed. Um, in terms of that's tragedy, it's terrible. And that person is not going to perform for anybody.
Right.
Right? Give me an algorithm that could predict that, and it's not going to happen. So there's all those vagaries of life, right? But and people are kind of like they're complex systems, like the weather. But we can make a fair amount of predictions as we go from climate. We can do great climate predictions in terms of what it's like if you go further north or get close to the equator, and we can make seasonal, and we can start kind of making short-term ones, but there is a limit to the amount of variance you can soak up for prediction. So we're never going to say we're going to get perfect, but we can say we can get a lot more.
Right. So it sounds like the goal is to make these types of predictions is to collect a lot of data, whatever that looks like on somebody. Like, so are we like recording them over a period of time? Like what actually would it look like to get enough data points?
It's mostly just in your social media profile. You've already given it away. It's in all your friends, all your choices, all those little pieces of information. When they collect it, they can predict quite a bit. There is problems with doing that directly.
Sure.
Because Amazon tried this, and some of them ones, for example, they're going to end up. You're going to try and de-bias them, right? But what usually there's some places with big data and they've got this de-biasing algorithm, but what they do end up doing is taking away a lot of the real variance they want. But if you don't kind of de-bias or do something along it, you typically have these kind of group differences and not always desirable. Now, one way around that is that you can within group norming, but that's somewhat illegal in the United States. Other countries don't have that issue, but it helps resolve it. So the last one though is to do and this one works really effectively, is that you you want to have a good theoretical reason to justify using this trait. You don't want to have a random noise, that uninterpretable noise that come up from these machine learning, which just take, well, I've taken all your preferences and what websites you went to, and it predicted. It's like, well, what does that even mean? However, intermediary block would say, okay, I want to use that to predict, let's say, conscientiousness, as well as all its facets. And then I can validate that. Did it predict conscientiousness? I'll give other kind of tests and say, yes, it did. And then I'll use that to predict performance. So you don't want to really take away that middle ground of theory, which we developed, and connection. Otherwise, you're going to get a whole bunch of adverse impact that you can't really justify, and maybe shouldn't justify. I don't even, I am the kind of the opinion that not all bias happens at the point of selection. A lot of it happens earlier. Let's say if somebody's raised in school regions which aren't very good, and then they come into the job market and they don't have the same skills of people who are in schools that were better funded. And so you just want to hire the best person. You just who's the best that can help me my business be successful. These people are better trained. I'm going to hire them. That's going to have an impact, but it's not because of you. It happens earlier in society. So you have to kind of balance that out. You don't want, for example, and this is the entire, of course, the diversity validity dilemma, and how to actually find that sweet spot. But if you don't kind of break it down like this, you can't even have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, I have to imagine that a system as wide-ranging as this, for all the efforts to debias it, would systematically prefer some people over others.
Yeah, and
because of whatever signals it's picking up that like we wouldn't realize at the time. But I have to imagine there's going to be, like, in a perfect world, it disadvantages the people who are less capable of the particular jobs you're hiring for. But realistically, that seems unlikely.
And that was the big kind of problem. As even the difficulty of having this conversation. I'm trying to choose my words really carefully. I'm probably not even being fully successful. But the idea of, like, you can already feel like the kind of audience getting their somewhat hackles up. They're kind of like, well, who are these people? And it's like, exactly. There are going to be people disadvantaged by this. Let's say we do it all perfectly. Let's say it's absolutely no bias in there, and it's completely meritocratic. And that's a high bar. We'll probably get close to it. But there's going to be a certain, even if we do it, there's still going to be adverse impact because we have it earlier in society, right? We haven't gotten rid of that either. And then so you're going to have disadvantaged groups no matter what you're going to be doing. Even if, let's say, we don't even have that, there's going to be people who are just not going to be chosen. And how are they going to feel about it? It's going to be really disruptive. Selection, when you can go in and you now officially tell any group of people that no, you're not going to get this particular type of work.
Well, I mean, when I think about the potential benefits, right? Like you dropped, sort of a trillions of dollars type number. And certainly the labor market is so inefficient that that's not hard to imagine.
It's not hard to imagine. I mean, I usually ask people for a back of the envelope guess, and it's like 20%, and it's like, well, actually pretty close, actually.
Right.
And that actually translates into about, $3 trillion. So it's right in line with our expectations. But politically, as I mentioned, this is toxic. I mean, it's very difficult to actually have, especially because you're going to mix in all those things. Any group that gets disenfranchised is not going to support anybody who does this. They're going to be going for interest. there will be groups that are disenfranchised. There will be some that I kind of did research. Like one of the big ones, of course, is general mental ability has the biggest impact. So I did a lot of research on this and said, look, it's actually shouldn't be weighted as much as it is. So I've kind of got it down. This is actually the proper amount to weight it. That one thing now kind of, eliminated so much adverse impact, but not 100% of it. And, we kind of, as I say, we lay a lot of this at the doorstep of businesses that they have to kind of correct for issues that happen downstream. Other countries, other places aren't going to have that. And so, and ultimately, as I mentioned, businesses want to go for the lowest cost. The most likely thing is that it's going to go overseas. It's if at all possible. So, and then how is that politically, right? It is, and you can start seeing that great. Okay, let's say we get perfect selection. We seem to be able to do it. It's in the cards. What happens next? And it's really, really dangerous.
That's I think one thing we can agree on is, even though we're having this conversation of what comes next, if the incentive is large enough, which it certainly in this case, right, we're talking trillions of dollars of benefit, the push towards that solution will march on in spite of whatever qualms people have about it. So
I believe that about genetic engineering too. We might have serious qualms about it, but if they ever really get good at it, so people can go in and, let's say, give their offspring, an extra 25 IQ points or whatever, and we could say, well, and then you have some countries which are doing that or even subsidizing it. Most likely what will happen is that you're going to get two classes. You're going to get some people who say, well, we want that for our kids, so we're going to go overseas and we're going to get that done privately. And then you have the people at home who we all objected to it, who are going to be clearly different. And it's going to be based upon, who had money and who didn't. So what are we going to do? Are we now just going to say, well, it's fine, right? It will clearly have a two-tier society. Or are we going to relent and say, oh yeah, okay, we're going to let genetic engineering. Okay, so then we do that. Then somebody says, well, I can make my child need only 6 hours of sleep too. And somebody said, well, okay, great. I can make my child to be, super conscientious. Is this really what we want humanity to be? Because all these things about selection and all these things are basically making free market capitalism the end all and be all, right? That's what it is meritocracy. You can produce most, what type of qualities, how can we kind of raise a better worker? That comes with costs. It's and I think we're actually coming to the point where we can kind of start acknowledging that this worshiping of productivity is not always a good thing.
No, but it benefits enough people enough that it's gonna, meaning if the progress of AI and its backlash recently, as far as I see it, right, like you have enough people sounding the alarm and saying, hey, we need to pump the brakes on progress here until we know about the risks. Doesn't seem like it's going to matter.
What did OpenAI dissolve their safety team? I believe that's what I read.
What did they do?
They disbanded their super alignment team.
Right. Yeah.
I think now it's an all-out race to see who can develop better AI as quick as possible.
And I think the risks there are more obvious in the risks, to a selection system like this, and
Yeah.
we're still hurtling towards it.
And there was actually similar conversations when Taylorism started coming along, and it actually went up to the U.S. Congress, and they said what was being proposed was a natural and beneath the dignity of man and all these other elements, and that we're treating people like animals, like a horse.
Hmm.
So, but it got done. I mean, we have factory lines. It was just so much wealth that got created by it, and it helped give rise to the middle class until eventually the wealth was taken away. Now it's not especially well-paying jobs, and yet we still have that system. That's kind of the implications if we extend selection all the way to the end. So there are like some people point out some of the problems, but most of the major problems we can make it far less discriminatory than what we have now. We
Hmm.
know how to do that. We can make it so at least some people get better paid. We can make it so that organizations have to compete on their culture, which is a great thing. They can be more, you should know ahead of time whether, let's say, a company's like it's a good pays well, but they're terrible at gender egalitarianism, right? That's something that you would want a company to compete on, right? That they would, a sense of fairness.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I
all
think.
those things, and I believe all of them will come about. You'll still get the commodification. You'll still get a huge disenfranchised. You'll still get globalization, and on you get the added wealth. But in whose hands does it go to? If it doesn't go
Sure.
to yours, then why do you care?
Why participate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple other things come to mind is also, the face validity of the data you're providing. It's like almost if somebody told you, I'm going to tell you whether or not you got a job based on your Netflix history because I can use it to predict, how good you're going to be. I don't, people aren't going to be so quick to sign up
But
for it.
let's say, okay, yeah, okay, let's say you object to that. I said, fine. Why don't you take this standard personality test and we'll give it to your friends and we'll compare about how much the proxies that we've made, because these things are just using behaviors as proxies.
Sure.
And it was kind of like it's a famous that we did in 19, I think O'Brien or Epstein, I think it was Epstein. He did a famous paper predicting some of the people some of the time. He found that the correlation between personality and any particular one behavior was very, very low. But if you aggregated the behaviors all together, the correlation with personality became more and more and more. Right? It's almost like each behavior was like an item in a
Hmm.
scale. This is just running in reverse. So we have all these behaviors of people being online, of what they click, what they buy, what they're
Sure.
associated with. And each one is kind of item until eventually we can shave them all together and say, okay, there's your personality trait. He said, well, I don't like how it was done. I said, well, all right, take this other one. Look, they're the same. And they said,
Right.
well,
On the whole, we get to the same place.
yeah, that's right. So it's equifinality.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, fine, we'll do it this other way. Same thing. All right, can we go on now? And I think to some extent, the system should constantly be validated. There's a certain percentage, maybe 1% of the population always takes a personality test to make sure that our calibration's always there. That's just good practice, right? Especially because the relationship between, there used to be one about curly fries. They said people
Mm.
who like curly fries were slightly more intelligent, right? So people kept them saying they
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
curly fries. And it kind of eroded the relationship.
Yeah. 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 I wonder if we're creating a new game for people to figure out how to play, meaning you pull data right now, it's organic, it's predictive because maybe people don't appreciate what it could be used for,
Then
20 years
that's
down the road.
the calibration.
So
So if you're calibrating it, we have your constant stream of people you're calibrating this against. You can see when it erodes and you can change it. So unless somebody has the wherewithal to completely control all their actions online, everything they watch, every place they go, all their friends over for a decade, yeah, good luck with that. I would say that type of person, I think, should be hired by the CIA or something like that. It's it's
yeah,
incredible that you could do that.
yeah. So let me
You
ask
can
you one more question.
you have ghost profiles. Let's say you're the
Sorry.
one person. A ghost profile is that even if you don't have any impact on social media,
Hmm.
that if you have like 5 or 6 friends who do, they can infer just by knowing that you're friends with these 5 or 6 people your own kind of profile. So now you have to make sure that you would don't associate with people who, and then I would say, well, I know one thing about you. You know,
Yeah, or people develop like a social score, and then those become the desirable people to associate with. Uh,
oh yeah,
because
that's a Black Mirror episode,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, they're a good one too.
Well,
But
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, this is all Black Mirror material, I think.
yeah, it is. But as I say, like it's Westworld. Dystopian fiction is often interesting when it extrapolates certain trends and gives us, and makes them more tense, but it gives us a perspective about where things are going, right? I understand Black Mirror is having trouble getting material because everything sounds too realistic now.
Yeah, well, that's that's when they really won at that one.
Yeah, okay, but
Um,
it's overall this is going to happen. You're right. I don't think it's. I think it's really what I believe about selection. It should be ubiquitous and free, right? This is something that um, it kind of overall it benefits society, but there's certain people going to cost. So you want to live in a society where there is meritocracy,
mhm.
but what are we going to do with that extra money? And I would say, well, we have to figure out the people who are disadvantaged by this. And this is like what they were trying to do with lotteries. And the lottery said we're allowed to have lotteries as long as the money goes into schools and that sort of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
They simply took the money; it was fungible. So every dollar they put in, they took it out from other sources. So that didn't really work. But if we agreed, let's say we do get an extra $1 trillion, can we spend it in a way that makes people okay with this? And I say yes, we can, right? It is possible. We can improve schools. I want everybody to live up to their potential, right? I want everyone to have, you know, I want the geniuses to be able to contribute where their minds work best. I want the conscientious to have their detailed oriented and where the details matter. I want the gregarious to be able to kind of bring communities together, and it's all good. We might not all be ready for, let's say, to be CEO material. I'm certainly not. That would make me miserable, or to be movie stars, or to be. But we all can be better off. So can we make a system so everybody is at least better off? And when you have that productivity and that extra wealth, yes. But as I mentioned, we don't tend to use it that way, and that's what bothers me.
Yeah, yeah, and I think frankly, there's only so much you can control. I think creating wealth, creating opportunity, you know, putting your best intentions out there, I think is ultimately the best you can do for a technology that continues to progress. So I want to ask you one more question because you've been very generous with your time. And so for anybody who's been listening to this conversation, who wants to get a sense of the types of organizations that you mentioned, Right Hire a while ago, who are the people that are practically pushing this forward, leading the way, talking about this? Like, where would people look to see the progress in this area?
I know one major company. I'm not going to mention them because let's say they. I don't feel like that interaction I had with them deserves it, right? I think a lot of places find it a lot easier to simply, and I suppose that what made them very, very good business people, right? Why buy when you can take, right? So, but yeah, I mean, it's just, as I mentioned, when you come back to it, it's just predicting whether a correlation goes up or down, right? That was the kind of the insight I had. It was a big one 20 years ago. Back when moderator analysis was just wall type tests, and everyone was saying there is no residual variance. We actually had to really fight with against Frank Schmidt that these weren't laws of the universe. So he was arguing that they were basically universal constants, and there was no residual variance in moderator. I know it's crazy, but that was the conversation that was going on. They've been trying to predict this since about 1972. But what they did was, I'll geek out a minute here. They used ordinary least squares regression when you actually had weighted least squares and weight by the sample error. And once you do that, it pops up quite a bit. You can predict the correlations. And now it's just a question of kind of finding the right job characteristics and organizational characteristics. So it's the math is out there. The articles are out there. The techniques are now really well developed. And you can even look up, I've got a couple of patent attempts for this, including how to even build it using subject matter experts on a dime. So it's, I got to get around to publishing that paper too, because the patent tech wasn't successful. So, I kind of, it is, this kind of thing is kind of like, well, I really pushed this for a big chunk of my career. Tried to get it going. It did get going. I thought I'd be more involved with it. But I've been thinking about this so long. What does this really kind of end up being? And once I started thinking it all the way through, it was like, wow, this. I mean, we already live in a world with a lot of, if you kind of actually, you can look up the books if you like. One's The Meritocracy Trap. Another one's by Peter Turchin called End Times.
Okay.
And it was, and they talk about, I mentioned, the lead over production. What happens when ambitious, talented people can't get good jobs? Right? And everyone kind of said that leads to a lot of societal strife. Back when I was in the 70s, we used to talk about what we do with all the extra leisure time. Right? We can revisit that conversation, but this is a path we could go down. And we could go down to the way of using the extra productivity, sharing it more widely so we have a more stable society. But I don't think we will until things get really, really bad. I thought it would be bad enough by now, but I guess it's going to get even worse.
Yeah. So where does that leave you? I mean, it's a quite a note to leave it on. But as somebody who's thought about this for a long time, if you had to think about just do you like you said, it's we're coming up to this, it's progressing. The incentives and the forces and the technological capabilities are all trending towards,
Yeah.
as you said, being able to
But
move
yeah,
closer to this.
they're here. It's just putting it together.
Yeah.
Like if LinkedIn want to do it, they could have something pretty good in 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think some of what you shared leading up to this, I want to find your exact words, because I feel like we're closing on a note that is very appropriate to how you build this when we initially connected. It was, I think you called it, one second. I want to find the actual words that you wrote. One second.
Okay, for sure. Take a moment.
One second. You described it as wonderful and terrible. It will destabilize societies, when you shared the paper with me. And I
I,
think
I,
that,
I, I think I was true to my words too. It was, yeah, it is. Look, no, we're not all equal. We just aren't. Some of us are better at some things than others. Sometimes those things go up in value, sometimes they go down. I don't want that the reason why people aren't successful to be due because they didn't have access to good nutrition or safety or education or any sort of bias. But even once you give everybody all those things, there's still going to be variation.
mm-hmm.
We're still going to select on for some people better than other ones. And that makes a society more productive. Even when you get rid of we address everything else, and so that's fundamentally good. But if you don't have a society which has it out for everybody or at stake for it, or consider that why would somebody support this group? What do they get out of it? It's not going to go well. And that's the model we're moving towards.
Yeah.
Right? But it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
look, I'm thinking some countries are going to get it right, and some are going to get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it'll be, I keep thinking it's such an interesting time to be alive. So I appreciate you being so generous with your time. I found this conversation challenging, interesting, concerning, but ultimately helpful in thinking about in many ways, the direction that we as people are heading towards. And I appreciate your perspective on just, I love the merging of all of the technical thinking, and it just, you can't avoid the philosophical, ethical ramifications of all of it.
Yeah, that actually
You need both.
before I became into psychology, my undergrad was in philosophy, so I guess I get to go back a little bit about it. I
Yeah.
hope I kind of explain myself to a adequately, and that it's that as I say, there are ways of doing this that are better than others,
Hmm.
and there's ways of doing it to minimize discrimination. But if you have meritocracy, some people will be favored over others, but that doesn't mean that you now get a free pass and don't have to consider about people who are left behind.
Yeah.
Right? We either do this all together, or we're likely never going, or likely we're going to tear it all down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a weird
Yeah.
blend. You have a kind of capitalism on one side, socialist on the other, something for everyone to love or hate, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like that's, I almost hesitate to go down that road because I feel like that's a whole different discussion. But
I really
yeah.
is going to impact them. I have no idea at this point how
Yeah.
people are going to respond to this. Um,
Yeah.
or whether they're going to love it or hate it, whether it's going to be like, yeah, he's 100% right, or no, he's a terrible
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to see the reactions that people have and the
Okay,
discussion
well,
that
no, I guess we'll find out. I'm putting it out there.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for putting it out there. I appreciate the conversation tremendously, and it's been a pleasure getting to meet you, getting to know you through this conversation. So
oh yeah,
thank
it's
you
been
so
great,
much
it's been
for
great from Michael. Yeah, at
thank
the I'm glad you kind of we had if you notice the lighting difference in Michael's room, we had to take a long break, and then we kind of graciously put it around. He's probably coming up to around 10 o'clock your own time, so I'll let you get out of here.
yeah. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
All
And
right,
that's
I
it.
just